Are Mediterraneans healthier? I think it's a very interesting question. So we are currently vacationing in Sardinia, which is part of Italy. It's kind of in the south. And, people here are very, very healthy. And when you walk around or you go to restaurants, you see people being thinner. They seem to be fit. They're very social. You see a lot of older people that seem to be in good health. So, and when we look at data worldwide of incidence of diseases, they have lower incidences of heart disease here, lower incidence of cancer, lower incidences of type 2 diabetes. So in general, as a population, when we look at the statistics, there's certainly a healthier population. And then the question is, why? Is it just the nutrition? Is it other, factors that come in there? And it's just very interesting to understand the culture a bit better, I think. So in terms of eating, what I noticed at least, which is very interesting, people do tend to eat heavily later at night. They eat usually around, between 8 and 10 p.m. That's when they have their dinner. Lunch seems to be the slightly larger meal, and they have that like around, 12 o'clock or 1 o'clock or so. But then from 1 to 5, everything's closed. So the stores are closed, everybody's having a siesta. So they have a very long period where they don't eat, where they usually sleep in the afternoon. And that's partially because it's very hot in southern Italy here. So in the morning then, the question is like, well, how do people start out their day? It varies, but the people we talked to, many of them, especially the ones that looked very thin and fit, just start out maybe with some espresso or coffee in the morning, and then they go about their chores. They're kind of hurrying up in the morning because even like at 10 or 11 o'clock, it starts to get very hot here. And so to avoid this morning heat, people get as much done as they can in the morning. Before then, they have their siesta in the afternoon. So starting out with coffee, again, having somewhat of an intermittent fasting window, let's say from 10, 11 p.m. whenever you finish eating, having just coffee in the morning, which certainly doesn't have any calories unless you put sugar in it or milk, and then having sort of the lunch, it seems for many people to be the first big meal, which is very interesting, and I think it's a very good pattern. That's number one. And then of course, I always talk about time between meals, which is important to allow insulin to come down. And that's certainly given as well because they have this long period in the afternoon when they sleep. Sleep is very important. I think people sleep probably about 7 hours, 8 hours at night, and then they have another, few hours in the afternoon. So it's actually a very good pattern. Lunch, there will certainly be some carbohydrates in there as well. People here, they do eat, pizza and pasta, which are traditional dishes, but they don't eat a whole lot of it, which is very interesting to me. Lunch could also just be antipasti, and antipasti was, I quite didn't understand until I really came here. It's just really a plate with very good cheeses, and they're locally sourced. There's a lot of goat cheese, regular cheese, a lot of hard cheeses, which are very rich in protein and very low in carbohydrates. And then they have like cured meats, salami. They're very famous for these cured meats here, and they're very delicious with some olives, let's say. So these are really meals that are not very big on carbohydrates. There might be some pasta or some pizza, but usually these are dishes that are shared, and they're kind of more like an appetizer really. So they don't give a lot of that. Also, when we look at pizza here, it's really thin. The dough is very thin. So again, it's not a whole lot of it. So again, it's a pretty good composition. So in terms of timing, I would say, the first big meal is really the lunch, like around 12 or 1, and then there's a long period between lunch and dinner of a few hours really, and then dinner could be anywhere between, let's say, 7 to 10. So that's one. And then again, if they do have carbohydrates, these dishes are usually shared, so the portions of that are quite small. And then there are a lot of either, fresh vegetables, or there are, olives, a lot of olive oil, and cured meats. That seems to be the main diet. A lot of water. I didn't see a lot of soft drinks, anything like that here. At night, maybe a glass of wine, but they're not really heavy drinkers. You see, like, the bottle of wine for the table, and then they kind of share that. So it wasn't really, that impressive of how much they would drink them, which is fantastic, because we don't want to minimize alcohol, obviously. So timing is interesting. Really, I would say 2 main meals, a lot of breaks in between, and really a long period over time where they don't eat, which is ideal. Then, in terms of the composition, so even though there are some meals like pizza or pasta, it's very different, I believe, than what we have in the United States, for example, because our food is a lot more processed, highly refined and processed, and they don't quite have that in Europe. Europe's laws are a lot stricter when it comes to GMO. and other processing or other preparation or growing of foods. So I would say foods are really a bit more wholesome, really, and kind of more like they used to be. They're less processed, and that might play a big role. Now, I think it's very difficult to get really a good study on this and saying, hey, for sure we can prove that people eating, in this pattern or that pattern, there's huge differences, because really doing a study design for a long period of time with these parameters, I think is very difficult. But I remember even back then when I was in medical school, there were studies that showed that people that, for example, lived in Japan, were much healthier than people that lived in the United States. When they moved from Japan to the United States, they became more Americanized and they followed an American diet. Their rates of colon cancer, for example, and heart disease went up significantly to really match the ones of the local population in the United States. So from those observational studies, we kind of know that when you follow a bad diet, that genetics may play less of a role. In other words, it's really your external factors that determine health in that sense. Here it might be similar. I mean, someone from Sardinia, if they move to the US and follow the US diet, they might become more obese, have higher rates of heart disease, diabetes, and cancer. So it's kind of a bit I guess where you live and what patterns you follow. And nutrition and timing of eating, I think, is a big one. Another pattern that you see here is that people are much more social, and especially older people. I think it's really fantastic to see this, at night when it cools down a bit, people are out in cafes and restaurants or just out in the street, they put their chairs out and they socialize. And there's a lot of older people then out there socializing, younger people coming by and talking to them. There's a lot more respect for the older generation, I would say, and it's really fantastic to see. And when we talk about longevity and we talk about stress levels, I think that's a very, very big one, how we interact, how we socialize, and how much stress burden we have in our daily lives. And it seems, at least from my observation in the short time that I've been here, that people are much more relaxed here. They seem to be more balanced, happier, they socialize more, and they, I think they have a very high value on family in general. So I think that plays a big role. Stress levels, we know, certainly can raise cortisol, can cause all kinds of issues. And when you have a lower stress level, when you have less of a burden in your daily life, and also maybe because you put less stress on yourself, I think that makes a big difference. So all in all, people seem to be very happy. Elderly people are highly respected here. Eating pattern is much better. One thing also, we went to a supermarket and we looked at different foods. So we're staying at a place where we can cook here. A lot of olive oil, and I talked in many videos about this. The oils that I generally recommend are butter, olive oil, avocado oil, and coconut oil, and they have less of these soybean oil, and they have less sunflower oil. You find it as well, but it's really more in the background. Whereas in the United States, those are our staples, our canola oil, our sunflower oil, and all these things. They have a lot less of that, and olive oil, because also olives are native here. They have a lot of the olive industry is very big here. Olive oil is fantastic, and the olive oil here, I looked at some of the labels. It's 100% olive oil. It's locally produced here. I think the amount of pesticides used is very restricted. They have a lot less of that, and again, the GMO laws are much stricter. I think actually they don't allow it at all, but I'm not 100% sure on that. I haven't quite found out if there is anything that is GMO produced here at all, especially here in Sardinia. So olive oil is a big staple of their diet, and I think that might be another factor that contributes to the overall health. Olive oil is really with every meal. When you're cooking, it goes from pasta to antipasti to anything that you really eat here will have some part of olive oil in it, which is really great. So that composition is just fantastic. And again, they don't have all the bad oils that we have so prevalent in the United States. So all in all, just by judging, being here and having been here for a few days, I think the eating pattern is great. I think the composition of the food is great. I think the stress levels are great. And, the overall kind of, how they interact with each other is very, very different. So all in all, I would say that the culture here is a very healthy culture, and it seems statistically that they have very low incidence of disease. And I think we can learn from that and implement some of these things in our daily lives.